Hello, welcome to the Six Slayers, the show of the Stats Bros. I'm Mike, chilling with Chris.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another show. We appreciate you tuning in. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy some more comic book content.
We have a legend in the house with us today. Joe Rubinstein has inked some of the most epic superhero comics. We even featured his work on Six Layers 1, featuring Wolverine Volume 1, Chris.
Oh my goodness, Mike, I am extremely excited to have Joe in studio. He's a titan in the comic book industry and has worked on my personal favorite stories and characters.
But before we talk to Joe Rubinstein, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment.
Let's get started.
Our next guest is a Guinness Book World Record holder for comics, inking the most artists. He has contributed to many epic tales like Marvel's Infinity Gauntlet, The Rebirth of Thanos, and of course, Wolverine Volume 1.
Mike, this is going to be epic. Discussing Wolverine #1 with him is a true dream. I'm nerding out right now.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you one of the masters of the ink and pen, Joe Rubinstein.
Yes.
I just took a nap. Could you guys bring it down a notch or two? I mean, it's like, I don't need this kind of pressure.
I love it, man. We're excited to have you here, Joe. Let's just dive right in. I just wanted to start with back in the day, whatever that means to you.
Just prior to the invention of electricity.
Yeah, something like that, yes. Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Yep. When I say the Crusty Bunker, what comes to mind?
Pain, much pain, much unpaid pain. The Crusty Bunkers, which interestingly enough, I didn't know why they were called that until like yesterday, literally. When a job got late, Marvel or DC, or maybe the individual penciler who was doing the book, would ask Neil Adams and his studio to just do the job as fast as they could and get it back to them. And that meant turning it into a piecemeal assembly line process where Neil, naturally, being the best of us, would do the major stuff, the big heads, big figures. Dick Giordano would be on lot, and of course Dick was a master inker. And then the rest of us would do whatever we did. Like once on a Doctor Strange, I did just the embroidery on his cape for a whole issue.
Nice.
And Jeff Jones, the great Jeff Jones, was in the studio one day and says, ink something. So just ink one figure, and that was that. In the nature of comic books, if you say, I need that job by Wednesday, and they call up on Thursday and go, can I have it for Monday? That's sort of the nature of the industry, and so it gets backed up and backed up and backed up. And then finally the inker has got to churn something out, and the colorist has got to keep up, and then so that's the nature of the beast. They rent space at a printing factory, a printer, to do the comic book. And if the comic book's not there, too bad, you've just bought the space. So of course they want that work to be there so the companies don't lose money.
So how did you get involved in that whole world? Because from what I read, you got involved in the comic book industry at a young age. So how did you hook up with Neil Adams and Dick Giordano? I mean, these are people that were reputable during that time period. So how did you get into that circle?
I'm so glad you said reputable, because those things can change. I was 13, went to my first comic book convention. When I was 11, I knew who Neil Adams was. I could spot his work above anybody else's. It was an issue of Spectre #2, I think. And I met Neil Adams, oh my God, and God in persona. And he was there with a guy named Alan Weiss, who you may or may not know. He hasn't done a ton of work in comic books, but he's a superior draftsman. And I just had the nerve to say, hey, do you need somebody to run errands at your studio? And he said, yeah, I do. And so I was 13 years old, and I went there and I made coffee badly, ran errands, mopped the floor, did whatever it took. That was a summer. And then when school came around, I was allowed to come after school to do work. By the time I was 15, I was the studio assistant, where I was helping out people, legends like Wally Wood, Russ Heath, to do whatever it was. Sometimes I would pencil the portraits of Boris Karloff and Rod Serling for Jack Gable when he did those books.
Wow.
I would ink backgrounds. And so I was doing that by the time I was 15. I was doing secondary figures for Dick. Dick was a great guy. Dick would stop everything and actually show us how to do something. Like, hey, Dick, how do you do this? And he'd show you. Neil was not that way at all. I don't know that I'm that guy to this day. I don't know if I'm trying to meet a deadline, if I can, like, leave me alone, I got work to do. And then it's a little bit like casting your bread upon the water, because by Dick showing me how to do it correctly, I wound up being his assistant doing backgrounds and secondary figures. And then by the time I was 17, I was getting my own freelance work. And so that's all I've ever done my entire life. Depending upon if you count my career starting at 15 or 17, I've been doing this for like 45 years or 47 years, and boy, are my arms tired.
Joe, like we said, a titan. I would like to follow up and discuss the process of creating Wolverine Volume 1. Can you please start with how you got the gig and what it was like collaborating with Frank Miller back then?
Frank was this skinny kid from Vermont who didn't want to be that skinny, but all the kind of work he was getting was like 6 pages in the back of weird war stories or something, or Doc Samson backup. I think we're the exact same age, except he was living on his own and I lived with my parents, so I had spare money because I didn't have to pay rent. Occasionally, Frank would show me his pencils and I would help correct the anatomy. Never a figure, never storytelling. I'm taking no credit for Frank Miller's career. I'm just saying that every now and again I would help a little bit with the anatomy. I guess he trusted me enough where when he got the Daredevil gig, he had me do the cover of the first issue, which was I think 161. So Frank and I were friendly, and in the olden days, you had to live in the tri-state New York City area to work, because there was not Federal Express, there was not email. So you had to physically hand it in. You didn't want to trust it to the mail. So we all knew each other. We all went to parties together or gatherings together, or a group of people would show up at DC Comics and hang out until Saul Harrison, who I never liked, would say, "What are you doing here?" So I delivered a package. Get out. Okay. So, and with Continuity Associates, I mean, Neil, is one of the greatest comic book artists who ever lived. He really changed everything. He had a studio. It was centrally located, close to DC, close to Marvel. People would come in for a while, leave for a while. And Frank was one of them. And so one day, and you go during the summer, a lot of people used to go up to Marvel for the air conditioning. And I was up there delivering a job, I guess. And I was reading Frank's Daredevils, and Daredevil was great. Frank deserved everything he was given because of that book. And he walked up to me and he went, "Hey, you want to ink this Wolverine miniseries we're doing?" I go, "Yeah."
That's it? Yes, let's go.
What are you going to say? Look, they turn to the people who did The Godfather or Citizen Kane or Gone with the Wind or something and go, "What was it like?" It's a job. We did it. They paid us. We went for lunch. We went home. It's a job. You do it, And you do it because you want to get hired again. You do it correctly because you want to get hired again. You do it because you'd like to have something to be proud of, since you spent the vast majority of your life, at least in my case, sitting in a room alone. So I'd rather not be embarrassed when Wolverine came out. But the truth of the matter is, I was embarrassed. And I tried as hard as I could. And it, a professional speed is about 10 days to do a comic book as an inker. I seem to remember the first book took something like 6 weeks because I didn't know what was going on. And I thought what Klaus was doing, Klaus was also Dick Giordano's assistant protege at one point. If, Dick Giordano taught Klaus and me and Terry Austin and Bob Wyachek and Mike DiCarlo. It's a very tedious process to do a comic book. To do a whole 22-page comic book in 3 weeks is a lot of work, which is why they broke it down into an assembly line process. I felt what Klaus was doing over Frank's pencils was absolute perfection. And it was great to read, great to look at. I would read the book twice. I would read it once, and then go back and I'd look at it, because I didn't want to be distracted by all the wonderful stuff where the story would get in the way. So Frank gave Klaus full pencil, the blacks are in, all the details are on stuff. He gave me what's called layouts, which means they're a lot rougher. The blacks are not as all indicated. Frank was doing something called, he was trying to break the Kirby barrier. Jack Kirby could draw an entire 22-page book in 7 days or less.
Wow.
And it would be great. It would be great, right? It's Jack Kirby. So sometimes some people would challenge themselves and go, okay, let me see if I can draw an entire comic book in 7 days. And that's what Frank was doing, but he was doing it in layouts, not full pencil. Consequently, a lot of the choices were made by me. Do I put a black here? Do I put a black there? Do I need more of an effect here? How do I do this? How do I do that? But I would call up Frank 10 times a day. Just when you thought it was safe to pick up the phone, it was me again. It's like, panel 4, what's that bottle about? Why did you? Oh, it's just an effect. Oh, okay. Panels 12, can I do a diagonal? No, it doesn't work there. Okay. So that's how that happened. Now, I did it. The coloring's wrong, by the way, in the cover. If you go to my website on Facebook, you'll see the way it should have been colored because the damn colorist missed the side lighting. So I did it. People liked it. It sold. I had no idea the impact it would have. I didn't realize it was the first comic book my brother ever bought me. It was the first comic book series that got me into Marvel Comics. It's the first comic book I ever really knew who the penciler and the artist were. And I've been getting that ever since, and it's great. But I was embarrassed. And then about 25, and you do the polite thing. Thank you. You don't say, you don't know what you're talking about. This stuff stinks. And then 25 years later, I dared to open up the book again, and I looked at it, and I went, oh, this isn't so bad.
Nice.
It's like I forgot my preconceptions, and I just started to look at it as what it was. Also, I have the privilege of the cover being voted one of the 100 best covers of all time. And recently it was in a show in Seattle, Washington, and it was insured at $350,000, which just proves to you I can't afford me.
All right, Chris.
But if anybody wants a recreation, I do those at a far more reasonable rate.
Joe, I actually love you explaining how you did the process with Frank, because I've been collecting comics forever. Mike's been doing the same thing, and it's rare that there's a credit as a finisher. So I'm love you explain that, because this whole time, like when we were researching the first show, we were like, what does a finisher even mean? And you let us know exactly, layouts to you taking over and making some choices. And that's awesome to know from our side, because I've always wondered what the hell is a finisher, and here we are. So over the years, you've worked with Frank Miller, and we think you are just as good a tandem as him and Klaus Janson. We want to know, are there any plans for you and Frank to work together in the future?
I'm open if he is, but I don't think he is, because I believe he just inks his own work, which I don't blame him. I mean, if I were a penciler, I'm a painter away from comic books. I don't want to do a started painting and then hand it to the next guy, go, okay, you do what you want. By the way, if the credits on a book says finisher or artists, Frank Miller, Joe Rubinstein, it sort of is the signal that I was more than just the inker. Tim Shooter decided that we want good storytelling, so we're not going to waste John Buscema and Sal Buscema on rendering. We can get a ton of other guys to do that, but Sal's going to do layouts, and John's going to do layouts, and so this is how John's going to do 5 books in a month, and Sal's going to do 5 books in a month, whatever. But Sal's layouts were very tight. John Buscema's were a little less tight. John Byrne's were like wisps in the wind. It's like, what? What is here? What does he want? What am I expected to do? Oh, by the way, people are always saying, oh, you're the inker. Who is the artist? To which I want to smack them in the face with a batarang. Because the good inkers are artists. Joe Sinnott, Al Williamson, Dick Giordano, Frank Frazetta. I mean, these were artists, ink artists as well as pencil artists.
I want to talk a little bit more about the volume of collaborations you had over the years.
Right.
I mean, you hold the Guinness record for inking the most artists, for Christ's sake. How did you end up collaborating with as many people as you did? Explain that.
All right. Well, firstly, I made the joke that I have the Guinness World Record and nobody remembers it's a joke. And it's been printed over and over and over again as fact. So finally, I wrote the Guinness people. I said, hey, I have the world's record. They went, we don't care, go away. We don't want to know you. So if the record existed, I have it because I've inked between 400 and 450 different artists. And I have literally inked every character in the Marvel universe and plenty of them in the DC universe. So if anybody ever felt like making it a Guinness record, I've got it, but it doesn't exist. Mark Grunwald, who was an editor, a really wonderful, wonderful guy, if you go to his site, he's passed on. He wanted to do a definitive encyclopedia that was going to say once and for all, who's stronger than who's taller than who, where did they really come from? So Mark came up to me at Marvel, which is where all great things happen, right? And he came up to me and said, we're doing this encyclopedia. You want to ink these 3 figures? I go, yeah. So it's like Ron Wilson, Brian Postman, and I don't know, maybe another Ron Wilson. I don't know. So I went home and I inked them. I brought him in. He looked at him and says, okay, well, great. How many do you want to do? I said, all of them. And then it became the greatest job an inker ever had. Because one form or another, it went for 20 years. I got to ink a single big figure. Easy, fast, great. And I got to ink people who never allow anyone else to ink their work. Joe Kubert, John Severin, John Bolton. Alex Toth said yes and then pulled out, schmuck that he was. And people who I really, really was thrilled to ink. John Buscema and Jim Mooney and Don Heck and, Paul Smith. Yeah, so it was the greatest gig ever. And the thing is, most inkers, most pencilers who ink, George Perez, John Byrne, Neil Adams, Tony DeZuniga, Fredo Alcala, they all take over. They all just make it their own work. And if you love Tony DeZuniga, which you should, it looks great. But if for instance, somebody finds a 6-page Frank Frazetta job in pencil that never got published, and they get an inker to do it, and you go, Frank Frazetta's last job, and you open up the comic book, you flip through it, and you can't find it. What happened? It said it was Frank Frazetta. Well, what happened is they got an inker there who said, I'm going to make it my own, and ignored Frank Frazetta. So if I'm given a John Buscema job, I would like it to be John Buscema when it comes back, and Gene Colan when it comes back. So inking is very boring. It's black, and it's a line. Unlike painting, where I have to figure out colors and values and models. So the way I make it interesting for myself is I try to accommodate what's in front of me. Oh, Bill Sienkiewicz wants a jagged, kinetic kind of a line. Oh, Al Milgrom wants a thick, classic comic book line. Brett Blevins wants a more rendery Frazetta-like line. So I'm getting into these people's heads to try and accommodate what they wanted. Dick Giordano was a versatile inker. Dick Giordano taught me how to be a versatile inker. And plenty of others are not versatile. They're one-trick ponies. And if you like the trick, it's a great trick.
So I want to get a little bit more into kind of how the way comics were assembled back in the day, before the computer scanners, the emails, the drop boxes. So if you could just give us an example of what the assembly line was like constructing comic books anytime pre-computers.
In the case of the Superman book, when Mike Carlin was in charge, there would be a yearly summit. And the pencilers and the writers would all figure out what's going to happen in all the books over a 12-month period. And then everybody goes back and they write their plots. Now, if there are new characters introduced, like for instance, Doomsday, they have to be designed and they have to be okayed. And besides their design, they also have to be colored the way everybody is. Mike Carlin was great because everybody got every month a package of everybody else's work to make sure that it was consistent. And that if he wore a jacket in Adventures of Superman, he better wear a jacket in Superboy or whatever the crossover was. So the writer writes the plot. The editor looks it over, goes, yeah, this works. He writes a full script. Okay, this works. The penciler gets it. He draws it up. The companies were always notorious for giving the editors way too many books to work on. So, yes, they wanted quality work, but they really just wanted it in on Tuesday, please, because I got stuff to do, you know? And so the penciler would get it, draw it up. The thing was okay. It'd come to the inker. The inker would do it. Now, in the old days, I would do a 22-page job and walk in and say, here's the job. Last time I worked for the companies, can we have a page on Thursday? Can we have 2 more on Friday? Can we have some on Monday? It's very stressful. Dennis Cowan was drawing a Superman Batman, I think it was called. And Klaus was inking it, but it was late. So they said, can you take over 6 pages? Okay, sure. Can we have them by 3 p.m. today? Can we have one by 3 p.m.? Yeah, okay. Can we have another one by 5? Oh, God, okay. How about 9? And it's like, that's a lot of stress. And also my method is jumping all over the place. I mean, I eat dessert first. I ink all the big heads, all the fun figures, all the stuff. And then I have all the awful stuff to do at the end, but it gets done. So for them to say just ink page 1, ink page 2, ink page 3, ink page 4. Yeah, but there's this really cool head on 18. I've been meaning to, you know. One of the things that all the people who just don't do comic books anymore say is, I couldn't take the deadline. I couldn't. You know, it's like, I went up to Marvel and they gave me 9 pages on Friday. Oh no, I think it was Thanksgiving. Can you have 9 pages by Monday morning? Because of the intensity of the work, at points in my life, I turned around and went, hey, wasn't it summer? Everybody may have been in quarantine during the pandemic, but I was 45 years ahead of the curve. I mean, you know.
We want to know your thoughts on what you thought about the book back then. And now, looking back, what are your thoughts of the impact of the series now?
You know, they don't pay you more for a page with 7,000 figures running at each other than they do of a page of a guy standing there going, how's your day, Fred? You know, I mean, it's Shooter was cool because it was like an unbelievable, horrible kind of job you got to get done. He'd do battle pay. Or if he recognized that he was asking somebody to do an inhuman amount of work overnight, there was battle pay. But the fact of the matter is, if you're doing the Silver Surfer in space, an itty bitty figure, a lot of space. And you can go through that pretty fast. And then they say, okay, but by the way, he's going to invade the Skrull planet and the Krees are attacking. And oh yeah, the Watchmen are watching. Go. It's not any more money, but you don't want to work 3 days on a page when it would have been nice to have done 5 pages in 3 days, right? Yeah. So I knew George was going to be a lot of work, but you can't slack off. You can't take out details that George Perez lovingly put in. And I did it, you know, and Jim Starlin was a friend of mine. Jim Starlin's how I got it into Marvel. He asked me to do that Avengers 2-in-1 annual thing that was really the first time that Thanos fought the Avengers. He was writing the thing, George Perez. George is a great guy. He's as great a guy as everything you've ever read about him. And then all of a sudden I get issue 4 and 3 George Perez pages turn into Ron Lim. Go, what? And it's just George had too much to do and he just decided he'd rather do the DC thing. And then, but as sort of a signal, which I didn't even catch on to, he inked all the covers to say, I'm not mad at you guys, I'm still here. And the irony is, I'm mad at you, George, you took my covers.
As of someone that's been in the game for 45 years plus, what's your assessment of the industry now? Like, whatever comes to mind when I say that.
Well, see, I'm not in the game. Comic books more or less forgot me 23 years ago. When there was an implosion in 1999, Marvel was selling something like 42 million units a month, and it dropped to 7. And many books were canceled. People panicked. And I've been like really, really, really underemployed ever since. and multiple reasons. One of which is computers have now made it easier for people to ink their own work, or that stuff that they call computer inking, which is really just darkening lines with no real addition or artistry to it. I mean, you again, somebody might show me something that's computer inked and go, "Oh my God, this is as good as anything I've ever seen," but I haven't seen it yet to know. And so people are inking their own stuff. They're doing computer inking. So I know a lot of people who want to get away from comic book companies, corporations, and just do their own books.
Right.
And sort of like when the Image Boys, you know, and you got to admit, you got to give them credit. Eric Larson said, "I want to do my own comic book. I don't want anybody to okay it. I don't want anybody to tell me what should be redrawn." And he's been doing it for what, like 25 years?
Yep.
I hear there are good comic books. I'm sure there are. Somebody should tell me who I should be reading these days. But the thing is, superheroes, I mean, I'll read Watchmen again. You know, I like The Authority. But superheroes more or less lost me, because I'd rather read about something a little bit more about real life and real circumstances, and like Will Eisner's books. I still love Watchmen, you know, and like I said, The Authority. I'm doing a book now for really nostalgia press called the Liberty Brigade, and the artwork is by me and Ron Friends and George Perez and Alan Davis and Barry Kitson, and we're trying to make comic books that look like comic books. And then I'm working for another company called Power Comics, and that's Ron Wilson and Alan Weiss and me, I think Bob McLeod. The whole thrust is to make a comic book that looks like what a comic book used to look like.
Now it's time for the main event, the stash portion of our show. We saw you at WonderCon last week in Anaheim, and we got some goodies blessed by you. Chris and I are going to share our top 4 comics signed by you last week at WonderCon, and then you're going to tell us what comes to mind. All right, so Chris, set us off, my man.
All right, Joe. So I'm a huge X-Men and Wolverine fan. I recently picked this up. This is Uncanny X-Men Annual 13, the first cover appearance at Jubilee.
We never heard of Jim Fern before, so just who's he and what was it like working with him?
He's a good, solid comic book artist. I mean, he doesn't do much in comics anymore, though. He did do 2 issues of Convergence, World's Finest, with the 7 Soldiers of Victory. What's it like working with anybody? The ones, and they say, what's easy? Well, if they draw badly, it's not easy because you got to fix it. And if they draw beautifully, it's not easy because you can't hurt it. You know, you got to bring up your game to ink John Buscema and Gene Colan and Lee Weeks. You know, so Jim Fern is just a wonderful, subtle kind of a style, and that particular Jubilee style, I think it needed a little bit more fun and animation to it.
My second book, Joe, is Marvel Premiere 53, Black Panther versus the KKK, and Frank Miller did the cover art. You inked it. Was this the first time you worked with him?
No, I'm sure that's way after when I did the Hulk, isn't it?
The Hulk. So that's your first issue is actually working with Frank.
The Daredevil, the Hulk issue.
Okay, so that predates. Okay, just want to make sure.
And also in Marvel Fanfare, Frank and I did a Captain America job where he saved some people from a fire. So, I don't know when anything was, but occasionally I can look at the work and say, oh, that's my old style. I can tell that I was using my 290 pen there before I switched to my 170. So that sort of helps me to understand the chronology when I look at it.
Mine is the third is like a trio of books we wrap together. DC Invasion. I picked that because that's the last time Todd McFarlane worked with DC. You worked on all 3 books, so just share with us your experience inking these giant books of DC Invasion.
Well, I mean, I knew that they were combos with different pencilers and different inkers, and I inked Bart Sears in one of them and Kevin Giffen. I don't think everything I do is great, and I feel like I'm in competition, and oh my God, Tom Palmer's in this issue. Oh my God, Al Williamson's in this issue. I suck. So when it's a combined book, I hope to hold my own. And, I did. I think this stuff works.
The last one, the fourth and final one, is Superman Forever, which was a one-shot anthology. What comes to mind, because this was an anthology, Superman Forever from 1999.
It might have been Norm, and again, good, solid penciler, but he was more of a designer. You know Trevor Van Eden's work?
Yeah, of course.
Trevor was like the youngest penciler in comic books. I was the youngest inker in comic books. He was like 16, I was 17. Graphic. It's less about good drawing, like an Adam Hughes or a Kurt Swan, but it's more about the shape and the darks and the blacks, the placement, and the good drawing. I always try to accommodate what's in front of me, and when it's somebody I respect, like Norm, like Dougie, Dan Jurgens, great. And if it's not, it's like, all right, well, gotta superimpose reality on top of this guy, girl, and improve upon them as my perception of improvement is.
Let me recap this list real quick. Number 1, Uncanny X-Men Annual 13, the first cover appearance of Jubilee. Number 2, Marvel Premiere 53. Number 3, DC Invasion. And finally, Superman Forever. I just love Alex Ross cover, so I've been collecting that. That's our list. Chris, take us away.
All right, Joe, it's been a true pleasure having you with us today. Is there anything that you're working on, other than what you've already told us about, that you would like the Stash fam to know about?
If you want me for recreations or commissions, I'm perfectly happy to ink other people's work. If you want to reserve your pencils, I can always do them on a separate sheet of paper. Some people like to frame them side by side. So I do commissions, I do recreations. I'm about to do a series for a company called Gamma, Gama, and it's either going to be one issue or 80. So
Wow.
it's a corporation thing, and they want to see how the first issue turns out. And again, I get the old guard in, the people like Jurgens and McLeod and me and whoever, So a contemporary comic book by Ivan Rios is gorgeous. A comic book by Ron Friends, inked by Joe Sinnott is gorgeous. Do you have a ring?
Joe, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like we got educated like beyond my expectations, that's for sure. The way you broke it down, especially the continuity experience in that studio, I thought that was awesome.
Other than WonderCon, do you have any more cons planned this year?
I got so many cons. I'm affiliated with a group called MB Artists, as in Marvin Bradley Artists. So it's like we're sort of a group. We sell limited edition prints and platinum prints and commissions and go to conventions. If you have a convention you want us all to go to. So yeah, that's where my con schedule more likely will be posted.
MB Artists. Thank you again, Joe. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit that like button. We are the Stash Bros. I'm Mike, speaking for Chris and Joe Rubinstein. We are out.